Muy buenos días. Un saludo al misionero Miguel Bermúdez Marín
Good
y
evening.
a todos los ministros
Greetings to missionary Miguel Bermúdez Marín and to all the ministers who are gathered today in different countries, in Colombia, in Venezuela, there in Africa, and in other countries. It is truly a blessing and a privilege to greet you today, Wednesday, October 2nd of this year, 2024. You may please be seated if you're standing. We are living in the time where the kingdoms, these kingdoms of the Gentiles, will be removed, and the kingdom of the Messiah will be established according to Daniel's prophecy. We see that stone not cut by hand in chapter 2, which in this end time will smite the feet of iron and clay of that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw. And it is the stage of the Gentiles where this kingdom of the Gentiles is currently found, which represents that stone, the coming of the Lord. In the sky these days, since the end of September, appearing this comet, Tsuchinshan Atlas, has been appearing, and they call it the comet of the century. This comet is possibly brighter than the comet that passed by 1997, which was the Halley-Bopp. And to be able to look at this comet, which is around these days, it started to become visible since September 25, a little bit before. On Sunday 27th, it was already visible to the naked eye. And to look at it, to locate it, you have to look at the Leo constellation. Not that it's passing by the constellation of Leo, but that you have to look towards the constellation Leo. For example, at the sunrise, you have to look towards the east. And then, from around there on October 12, you have to look if it's seen from the northern hemisphere, then you have to look to the west at sunset. Now, notice how this comet will be seen in the evening and in the morning as well. It is like the planet Venus, which appears and is seen in the evening in some seasons, and in other seasons it's seen in the morning, and it is the same star, and that is the morning star, which represents Christ as his coming. I am the morning star. And that is one of the promises to the overcomer. To him that overcometh, notice, I will give the morning star, that is the second coming of the Lord, which shines and makes known a new dispensational day. And notice how this comet is already visible from the 12th onwards, more or less until October 12th or so, according to what I have been seeing in the information that they are giving, which is the Day of Atonement, that Feast of Atonement for the Hebrew people. Meaning that around that date until the 30th, more or less around that time, day 12, it is the day that it is in its closest point to Earth. It will be the brightest on that day of October 12th. But look, it will be from these two seasons, from September 27th and October 2nd, which is the Jewish New Day. that is, from today until tomorrow, and Rosh Hashanah will be celebrated tomorrow, which is the Jewish New Year. And notice how all these signs in heaven shows that something is happening on earth. And when these signs emerge, they show that in the divine program, God is either fulfilling something or later on He would be fulfilling something on earth, because they are signs that shows us first, that is, God through these signs first in heaven, the Bible, showing us everything that God will be carrying out on earth, either at that moment or at that time or further on, later on. Now, it's a very difficult situation for the Hebrew people there these days. The Hebrew people always have these situations of war and all of that. But notice, all it's due to rejecting Christ at His first coming. But it is promised that they will receive Him at His second coming. They will receive the fulfillment of the coming of the Son of Man with His angels. And according to what Reverend William Branham spoke on page 36 from the Message of the Ages, the edited one, it is on page 36 from the book in English. It says, "Now, when is the gospel returning to the Jews? When the day of the Gentiles is finished. When will the gospel return?" Reverend William Branham says to the Jews, when the dispensation of grace ends. In other words, when the dispensation of the Gentiles has already finished, that's the dispensation of grace. He says, the gospel is ready to go back to the Jews. What gospel? The gospel of the kingdom, meaning that what was stopped there in the preaching of the gospel of the kingdom at the time of Jesus continues. The gospel of the kingdom is preached to the Hebrews again in this Jewish age. He says, "Oh, if I could just tell you something that is about to happen right in this our day." See? Our day. And he writes there, the Gentile day, meaning that at that time we were still living under the dispensation of grace. That is why the angel said to Brother Branham, "It is not your time nor the ministry. Go back," because he was about to enter Israel. He was in Cairo with ticket in hand and all. There God ordered him to return. Now, notice how God can show a prophet up to a certain place in the revelation, in the program that God is carrying out, and He takes him to the maximum consequences, thinking that He is the one that is going to fulfill that. He lets him get to a certain point. For example, there they prepared everything. They prepared the Bibles and they prepared tickets and all the things that go along with a flight like that and an activity like that. And the Holy Spirit let him prepare everything, and then at the last minute tells him, "No, you're not going to. It is not you. Go back." Anybody could say, but all that expense, all that could have been avoided. But notice, there, God was showing us that it is through a prophet that would return, that the gospel would return to the Hebrews. In other words, that same way that he was carrying out through Brother Branham was the way God was going to fulfill it. God was showing the people the way it was going to be carried out, but it had to be under the corresponding ministries. And he only had the ministry of Elijah in its fourth manifestation, and it is the ministry of Elijah, but in its fifth manifestation, accompanied by the ministry of Moses, a messenger, a dispensational ministry. And in that way, the Holy Spirit would return to Israel through that instrument. Now, When he tells him to go back, notice there was still a work to be done in the midst of the Gentiles. And there was still a work, and a work that the fourth Elijah had to conclude. But when in the book of quotations on paragraph 1485, he says that he was going to ride, that is, from the west will come a white horse rider. We will ride this trail again. It is the ministry of Elijah riding that ministerial path in its fifth manifestation, where he first calls, seals, and gathers the elect, the bride, and he places them in the sheepfold, in the age of the cornerstone, in the storehouse. And the tares are bound and cast into the great tribulation. Notice, he also comes to do a work in the midst of the Gentiles. He makes the separation, he does the gathering, he gives the rapturing faith to the elect, and he turns to Israel. But notice that it is in the midst of the church that Israel sees him. But certain things have to take place in the divine program, wherein that instrument has to carry out, so that then, with those events, God materializes, fulfills everything corresponding to the church bride, both the church bride, the foolish, as well to the Hebrew people and to the lost, which is the world. In other words, the world and the 144,000, the foolish and the bride, all are impacted by the third pool. Now, he continues to say here, oh, if I could just tell you something that is about to happen right in this our day, this great thing that is about to happen will carry over to Revelation 11 and pick up those two witnesses, those two prophets, Moses and Elijah, turning the gospel back to the Jews. We are ready for it. Everything is in order. As the Jews brought the message to the Gentiles, even so the Gentiles, and he writes there, Moses and Elijah, will take it right back to the Jews, and the rapture will come. Now, Peter and Paul, notice, through those ministries, God brought the gospel from the Jews to the Gentiles. And how? Through some instrument pertaining to that time, which typified the ministries of Moses and Elijah, who would be manifested in that veil of flesh, which would be carrying out that work. It must always be a messenger in effect present. It cannot be one that has departed and has to return to carry out the work that God promised for the end of time. It has never been that way. It has always been the present veil of flesh who is alive in the time for the fulfillment of those promises that He promised in every age and in every dispensation, because God is a present God. He's always a God of today. He is an eternal present. And we have seen in these days, yesterday as well, how in prior days they have threatened to attack Israel, and yesterday we already saw that threat fulfilled of all those rockets launched, which Israel has the right to defend itself. But notice, there is a promise that says, he who blesses you will be blessed, and he who curses you will be cursed. Everyone who overturns or turns against Israel will have God's wrath upon them. Nations, governors, presidents, and individuals as well. All of the divine judgment will fall on anyone who speaks or does evil to the firstborn son of God as a nation, Israel. And Israel will still have many struggles and trials. And we see in the book of the seals many things that were told by Reverend William Branham to us, and he told us that before the beginning of the Great Tribulation, those 144,000 would be sealed. Because in order to carry out the fulfillment of the resurrection and the transformation and the rapture, every person that it's written in the Lamb's Book of Life, that is, every child of God written in the Lamb's Book of Life, has to be sealed. Both the church bride, as well as the Hebrew people. And even, notice, the foolish virgins also receive strength so that they will not be deceived in the Great Tribulation. And the seal is not placed on them, the number placed on their foreheads. Those people would be deceived by the false prophet, by the Antichrist. The beast would be sealed, and not be sealed those people on their foreheads, which represents having that part of Trinity, and in the hand to do the will of the beast. We have spoken of all of that in some studies, but notice we are also seeing how all these movements of wars and rumors of war and all that is growing in a physical field as well. But we see in Revelation chapter 7 that a war, a third world war, cannot be unleashed until the servants of our God are sealed on their foreheads. It says, and I heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000 sealed. In other words, those angels are placed there so that the wind will not blow, and that is a third world war. Because God still has to seal the 144,000 through His Holy Spirit. And then we see them already on Mount Zion in Revelation chapter 14. Now, everything that is happening in this time was already prophesied by the prophets in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, in the book of the prophet Daniel, in the book of Revelation, in the messages of our brother Branham. Everything was brought, and in everything that our beloved brother William Soto Santiago brought to us, in that good tidings message, bringing us that news, which Moses and Elijah will also be given news of everything that is happening and will be happening later on. Notice, because each messenger is, let's say, the journalist, the reporter of God, is the one who brings news from heaven. Now, let us keep our spiritual eyes wide open, because from one moment to another, something will be taking place in the divine program in the midst of the church bride, what each one of us are waiting for. So, onward, ministers, fellows, and brothers and sisters in different countries who are gathered today, those of you who are able to see the eclipse these days in the evening or in the morning, that also is the ring of fire, as they call it, which will be seen in the south, in Chile, in Brazil, and also the comet that is also passing by. because this comet had also not passed by for 80,000 years. So, and I think it is the last time that it will pass by. So great signs are taking place these days. There is more information. What I've been talking to you about is a little bit of what I've seen, but you can look for more information of these events that are taking place so that you may be aware of everything and thus be with our spiritual eyes wide open, eyes set on heaven, it says. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. God bless you and keep you, and may you continue having a happy day filled with God's blessings.